Thank you very much. Thank you. Is that working? Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today with such august colleagues. I should start with a confession in this company. I'm not a lawyer. I may well be the only person here who isn't a lawyer.
I'm not either.
But as certainly as a journalist, a writer, and a head of a think tank that deals with Islamic radicalism, I'm certainly giving quite a lot of work to lawyers. At the moment, as indeed anyone who writes and works in this area does. One of the things one can't help but notice in recent years, particularly perhaps since 2001 and perhaps more so since 2003 and the Iraq War, is that almost everyone you meet says they're an international lawyer or claims, intuits with you that they're an international lawyer. There's an old saying in England, when everybody's somebody, nobody's anyone. And it strikes me as sort of being relevant to this one, because certainly you can now have a conversation in Britain, at any rate, about international law. Somebody will just tell you, well, you know, the Iraq War was an illegal war. And you go, yeah? Against international law? Yeah, everyone's agreed with that. Well, you say it's against international law, I say it's for international law, and no one is any the wiser at the end of it. I think the reason I wanted to speak today, and the thing I wanted to address most, and why I wanted to do this panel on freedom of speech, is because it is on free speech that the greatest enemies of the West today have seen their greatest opening. The common enemies of Britain and America know they cannot win the battle of ideas in a free and open terrain, and so they have decided to shut down that free and open terrain, and they are being, I have to say, fairly successful about that. You'll all know the case of the Ehrenfeld case, where Rachel Ehrenfeld's book that wasn't published in Britain could nevertheless have the now late, I'm glad to say, Sheikh bin Mahfouz attempt to prosecute her through the courts of Britain, in the British courts. This was something I'm glad that the American courts have helped to sort out, but those of us in Britain remain under this problem to a great extent. It's a problem now that has gone beyond just, beyond, as it were, what one would have been able to say a few years ago were obvious legal grounds. Now, if you say somebody is funding terrorism, that is certainly something you can have out in court, and perhaps should. But when it's simply stating an opinion about a dead historical figure, for instance, I think that people should start to be alarmed when that becomes a matter for the courts. It should be a matter of some alarm when even a joke or a cartoon becomes a matter for the courts. The British comedian Rowan Atkinson said recently that the only justifiable response to a good joke is to laugh, and the only justifiable response to a bad joke is to not laugh. But the idea the courts should be involved in either case is preposterous. And yet that is what is happening. Many of you will know the case in Holland of the politician Geert Wilders, who is currently on trial in his country for opinions, for the expressing of opinions. This has only come about, and the prosecution in Holland has said so, because of the number of Muslims who have complained about Mr. Wilders' statements in public. Now, if you read the charges that are down against Wilders, they include, for instance, the fact that he has said that he thinks that immigration into Holland should stop. They also include the text of his film Fitna. Now, if any of you have seen this, you'll know that only the last few minutes have any text at all from Wilders himself. The rest is video footage of imams and hate preachers calling for the destruction of the West. So Geert Wilders is partly on trial for quoting Yusuf al-Qaradawi and other jihadi preachers inciting violence. Now, it's very unlikely the Dutch courts are going to go for any of these hate preachers. In fact, they haven't done in recent years, even in Holland. But they are going for somebody who's reporting that hate speech. The same case, of course, you'll know, came up recently, and I'm sure that Mr. Kotler will be able to talk about this in greater detail. The same case has come up in Canada, obviously with particularly the Stein Levant trials in these kangaroo Mickey Mouse courts. These are these terrible infringements of freedom of speech are lessons which Islamists are learning very fast and which we are learning very, very slowly. A terrific example cropped up the other day. The Danish magazine, left-wing magazine Politiken, 2 years ago, republished one of the Danish cartoons of Mohammed. And it did so in solidarity, along with other Danish newspapers, after the cartoonist in question had another attempt on made on his life. Now, Politiken last year received a letter from a Saudi lawyer. He claimed that he was acting on behalf of 94,923 descendants of Muhammad. Now, I know he got around a bit, but I, by any judgment, would think this was a preposterous claim. Incidentally, it's interesting that also the first complainant against Mark Stein claimed that he was a descendant of Muhammad, as if this gives you special protective status in the eyes of any court. Well, Politiken amazingly accepted this Saudi lawyer's threat. He said, unless they publish the following retraction within the following amount of time, he would take action on behalf of these descendants of Muhammad for defamation. I cannot imagine how that could have gone ahead, but the threat itself was enough to ensure that Politiken did indeed publish the the apology in exactly the format requested of the Saudi lawyer. This is a terrible situation we're getting into, and as I say, it is very, very effective what is happening. What is now happening in my country, and I think in many European countries, is effectively an inversion of truth and falsehood, and an inversion of what is hate speech and what is not. Every week in the UK, I wrote about this recently in the Wall Street Journal, every single week in the UK there are hate preachers going around campuses who teach the murder of Jews, the murder of homosexuals, the murder of other ethnic minorities, and so on. None of these people are being prosecuted for hate speech. But anyone who attacks them and criticizes them, sure as hell will be. A great example just came up last year when, of course, Geert Wilders, I mentioned earlier, was due to come into the UK to give a speech in the House of Lords. You'd have thought it wasn't that big a problem, a Dutch parliamentarian coming and speaking to British parliamentarians, but the Home Secretary in Britain decided that she would try to keep him out. I found out that only a few weeks later, the spokesperson of the terrorist group Hezbollah was due to come to the UK, not only to come into the UK, but was being paid to come into the UK by UK universities to give a hate speech tour. Now, we'll, I'm sure, discuss later in the day the whole idea of international jurisdiction and arrest warrants, but to my mind it is preposterous as societies that we have found ourselves in a situation where an elected parliamentarian of a neighbouring country cannot come into our country, but that a terrorist facilitator can. Yet that is the norm. The reason I say all these things and why I wanted to wind up on was this, that you all know the famous judgment of Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes about not having the right to shout fire in a crowded theatre. You also know that this is almost always misquoted. Wendell Holmes said you don't have the right to falsely shout fire in a crowded theatre. The reason this matters is because in the current situation in Europe and other countries, many of us deem it to be the case that the theatre is indeed on fire. And we are being prosecuted and subjected to very often exceedingly flippant and deliberately time-wasting legal practices and legal exercises to stop us pointing out this truth. The final thing, if I may, is this. There is an increasing tendency coming also, I think, from America at the moment on this matter, which is making things harder, and I just want to flag it up today. I was at a dinner last week where President Obama's envoy on anti-Semitism gave a speech. It was by and large a very good speech, but she fell into one trap I just wanted to warn about now, which is in the whole discussion of hate speech, there is a terrible poisoned chalice being offered to people, and it is this. Many Muslim demagogues are using this. They say, we will criticize anti-Semitism if you will join us in criticizing Islamophobia. I just want to flag this up because it is a terrible problem at the moment. These are being held up, and President Obama's envoy said this last week. She equated the two as well. The two are not equatable. Anti-Semitism is hatred of the Jews as a race. Islamophobia is, as far as I understand it, anything that any single individual Muslim finds offensive at any one time. It's only been a word that's been around for a few years, and yet it's strangely already being written into law. It's being written into law in my country, it's being written into law in Holland, in Denmark, in Canada, and other countries. I hope we can do everything we can to push back against that. Thank you.